I'd like to think, and I'm sure maybe somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we really started that conversation, obviously with meat. And I think that one of the most positive things to come out of it is the fact that you can walk into a supermarket now, and be it a Whole Foods, be it a Publix, Safeway, Acme, whatever it is, and you're going to see grass-fed beef in the market. You'll be able to find pastured chickens, fully pastured eggs, things like that. You're going to see companies talk about animal welfare now in a way that they haven't before. And I'd like to think that we were at least a bit responsible for that. And that's huge, right? That's bigger than any single butcher shop on a corner in a neighborhood, right? Like, if you can change the way a company sources, if you can change one little tiny facet of how a company does something, that's substantive change right there.
Good cutting enhances the quality of good meat. Poor cutting results in an inferior piece of meat, regardless of quality.
Hello and greetings to all you meatheads and all you groupies and folkies and collaborators of the greater meat community. Greetings to all you listeners out there in my extended family, that is the food web and the meat web. This is Ryan O'Hearn at Gather and Break, and today on this here Meat Block podcast, I'm going to bring you the beginning of a multi-part series, a series of long-form conversations with the guy, the muchacho, the pinche cabron known as Bryan Mayer. He's been on this podcast before on episodes 86 and 90. I encourage you to go back and check those out. Give those a listen. He's talking to Travis on those, and they're great. Give them a listen. But it was just the tip of the iceberg, so we had to bring the guy back on. He's helped open many butcher shops and collaborated with many butcher shop openings across the nation. He's taught butchery and slaughtery in several education-focused establishments. He's helped open restaurants and opened his own restaurant/butcher shop combination. He's acted as an advisor and a consultant to many food and meat-related businesses. He is a real treat to speak with, so much so that I've decided to break our conversation into multiple parts and pieces to be released separately. Part 1 today focuses on giving some history on Bryan's involvement in the craft butchery resurgence phenomenon that started in the early 2000s. As it exists now, every major city in America has at least one craft butchery style niche whole animal brick and mortar butcher shop, and most of these places came to be because of a trend in craft butchery that was sweeping the nation. Bryan was at the epicenter of that trend. He was a key influencer during the early days, and through the course of this part 1 conversation, I try to ask him a number of questions about what things were like from his vantage point, not only during the early days in New York, but also as time has progressed, how the development, twists and turns of this movement have looked from his perspective. Bryan is a pretty ideal person to speak with on any number of subjects regarding meat industry, food industry stuff. So without further ado, here goes part 1 of my discussions on all things meat with Bryan Mayer. Hit him up at Bryan D. Mayer on Instagram if you want to ask him any questions. He's really receptive to that kind of stuff. Bryan D. Mayer.
Well, I just wanted to say that I'm really psyched to be back on here again so soon. I had a blast talking to Travis and being a part of the show. So yeah, I'm sorry for your listeners if they didn't want to hear me again, but you know.
Well, you got that baritone like Travis was talking about, so it's a beautiful addition to the show.
Lovely, thank you.
What is your vantage point on the Know Your Butcher neighborhood butcher shop revival? What does that look like to you? Because I use the word craft butcher and craft butcher movement, but I want to like give that. I want to hand that off to you and say, like, is that the right term for it? Is that how you see it? And then how has social media been a part of it?
Yeah. I mean, I certainly don't mind that term. I don't think it takes away anything from anybody. I don't think it's a limiting term to be a crafts person. You guys delved deep into sort of the meanings of terms and in regards to meat cutter and butcher and all those sorts of things. And, I think it really just has to do with, again, this sort of advent of social media, people becoming highly visible for what it is they do or don't do. And this sort of idea, of everybody trying to be their own personal brand in something, which is totally fine. Again, I'm not against or for any of these things. It's just, I guess, maybe what I see happening out there, and I think it's great. I think that's sort of maybe one of the benefits of the advent of social media, is that people can find these new models and these new career paths where maybe it was very limiting in the past. So, yeah. So the craft butcher, it's whatever you want it to be, it can be. I look at my skill set, and that is what I put on me. I don't put that on anybody else. I don't expect that from anybody else. So when I say butcher, I am a butcher. What does that mean? Well, for me, that means that I know some stuff about raising livestock, that I know some stuff about slaughtering, that I know some stuff about butchering, that I know some stuff about cooking, to me, that makes me well-rounded. And that's personal. To somebody else, it might not mean any of that. It might just mean cut meat, and that's totally fine. I don't feel that takes away from my definition of the word. I don't think it lessens it. It's just whatever it is. If I feel like I have to go in to explain to somebody how my skill set might be different than somebody else, well, that's fine. That's a job interview, whatever. So I don't really sort of get too caught up in the terms and all that. But I guess, obviously for the sake of social media, it's really important to like identify yourself as this thing. And yeah. If somebody asks me, what do I do for a living? I say, I'm a butcher. And if it needs to go past that, then we'll have a conversation about all the different things that entails. But really, I'm a butcher, right? Yeah. That's what I do. Yeah. When I fill out my taxes every year, that's what I write. I've been fortunate and grateful, and I work very hard for it, but, to be able to sort of move in and out of various areas of the industry. I feel super grateful for that. And so, yeah, it's always there's always a little bit of some sort of personal ego in there when, I'll say like, I'm a butcher and this is what I do.
I like the term jack of all trades butcher, which is like, so it's one way to categorize. It's a type of butcher who has a little bit of knowledge across a few different components here. And you were there in the early 2000s. I was not aware of what was going on, but the way I imagine it is that society became starved for a jack of all trades butcher because everything had gone so specialized as a result of huge innovations in the 20th century in the technologies of the meat industry. I kind of imagine that society was like, I am looking for that butcher I can go get FaceTime with, who knows a little bit about farming, knows a little bit about meat cutting, knows a little bit about slaughter, and can get that FaceTime with me, a.k.a. neighborhood butcher shop. Did you have a sense of this, like the movement you were part of was desired by the community?
Yeah, I think, it slowly started to hit. I know that, there was a sense that something was happening, just through the volume of people that were sending emails and getting in touch with us through social media, and Instagram really wasn't such a big thing back then, Facebook. And so people would send messages, but lots of emails, and I think, so it definitely, we were becoming more and more aware of it and more aware of, our position in it. But really, I think for me, it wasn't totally sinking in until sort of the larger media outlets started to take interest in it. And once that started happening, it certainly changed everything, I think. Some good, some bad. But that's sort of for me when it became that moment of, oh, this is more than just a trend, because we were always sort of just sitting there going like, well, it's good that we're getting in on this while the trend is hot, because who knows how long this is going to last. And I think once the big media outlets came into it, once people started coming to us that wanted to open up shops or wanted to incorporate this stuff into their restaurant or their market that had already existed or they wanted to open, I think that was the moment where we kind of knew it was moving past that trend zone, and that could quite possibly be something that could really be another part of that movement. And that movement maybe being people starting to take a little more agency over the stuff they eat and where it comes from and all of that sort of thing.
Gotcha. So you start seeing big media outlets pushing out magazine articles and I don't know, what kind of stuff were you seeing?
Yeah, exactly that. I mean, and again, this is like the early days of like people understanding like how you could use social media to, put forth your agenda. So there wasn't a lot of videos. That wasn't a thing. But there were certainly a lot of articles, like you said. Yeah. There were a ton of articles being written and across media outlets that didn't even necessarily have food and agriculture as a center point of what they did. So your stereotypical sort of food magazines were there, and they were, writing articles and doing pieces. But, you had all these other media outlets that were wanting to sort of get in on the conversation, I guess, for good or bad.
Maybe the romance of it, the sexiness of it. That's the kind of stuff that I've seen a lot of the big media outlets capitalize upon, which is it's just inherent in the fact that we're cutting meat, right? It's got that sexy component. And then, like you said, you were seeing people coming to you, trying to then open their own shops. You started seeing that a lot. Yeah?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that was sort of the beginning of, at least for me, the idealist phase. I had come into this with some pretty idealistic notions, right? But then all of that started to really support those things. Meaning, oh yeah, we can really have a butcher shop on every corner. Oh yeah, this is how it's supposed to be. Oh yeah, we're really going to start to drive down prices. Oh yeah, we're really going to start to increase access and affordability, and all those things that were really important to me. From the get-go. Why would I want to be doing this thing and care so much about this thing and toss around that word sustainability or whatever it means, if it was just for a very small segment of the population? And so that really sort of helped support the idealistic view that I had, and I think that a few of us certainly had. And I don't think it was wrong, and I don't think it was a negative thing at all. But the reality was that we were probably pretty far off. We were pretty far off.
Pretty far off of actually attaining those goals.
In terms of, yeah, I think it we certainly had a huge positive impact, but at least for me, what I wanted to at that very early stage accomplish, looking back, that was just not going to happen. But I think there were things that happened that we didn't even dream of. So,
talk to us more about that. What? Yeah, has the movement succeeded? You kind of maybe alluded to the fact that maybe it hasn't gone the way that you originally hoped. But there was a positive impact. That's kind of what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, well, I think exactly. Yeah, which is the way that life goes often. I think that the idea of pre-1970s, right? So like when you saw the consolidation in the meat industry and you saw big beef come in and basically take away shop's ability to work with whole carcass, right? And everything went into boxed meat. The folks that decided that they were going to stick with cutting whole carcasses were slowly bought out. And so, the idea was like, well, hey, here we are 30 years later, or 20 or 30 years later. It's like, no, we can bring that back. Without really understanding a whole host of inefficiencies that were baked into that, and how technology had progressed in such a way that we could be more efficient, and efficiency not necessarily being a negative thing here, but also sort of capitalizing off of a growing demand to, at least in urban centers, right? Because I don't really think that ever was lost rurally. I think, just being what urban centers are, there is a slight disconnect to what is happening. Slight, I say, right? To what's happening in rural communities. And so there was this, right? This drive to sort of regain an understanding of what was happening with our food systems, and maybe start to correct some of the things that had gone awry. These little science experiments. So maybe, we can correct these things, and we can tackle the issues of accessibility and health and nutrition, and whatnot. But I think I'd like to think, and I'm sure maybe somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we really started that conversation, obviously with beet. And I think that one of the most positive things to come out of it is the fact that you can walk into a supermarket now, and be it a Whole Foods, be it a Publix, Safeway, Acme, whatever it is, and you're going to see grass-fed beef in the market. You'll be able to find pastured chickens, fully pastured eggs, things like that. You're going to see companies talk about animal welfare now, in a way that they haven't before. And I'd like to think that we were at least a bit responsible for that. And that's huge, right? That's bigger than any single butcher shop on a corner in a neighborhood, right? Like, if you can change the way a company sources, if you can change one little tiny facet of how a company does something, that's substantive change right there. And I'd like to think that we really started to push that conversation, through training people, through the media taking note of what we were doing up there in Kingston. So that's the positive. But yeah, man, I wanted to see butcher shops on every corner, but I was looking at this in through a vacuum, and not the reality of how things are in 2018. And I would not want to open up a butcher shop in 2018. Yeah. It is hard. Yeah. It really is.
Yeah.
And I have the utmost respect for anybody that's doing that right now. I just, it's hard. It's difficult. For a vast number of reasons, logistics and real estate and all those things. But I'm glad that people do, and I want to support that people do. It's just, I don't want to personally do that. I should rephrase that.
Yeah.
I hope more people do it. I hope people continue to do it. I'm happy to help people do it. I just don't want to personally do it.
When you catch an audience, big things can happen. And that's kind of what you're referring to. Grass-fed beef, 100% grass-fed beef or whatever in the supermarkets, and the mega companies picking up and trying to imitate these trends. This means this is a sign and symptom that you guys caught an audience, a huge audience, and that cannot be understated.
Yeah, and it's not all positive too. I mean, like everybody's always going to find something wrong with everything, right? So like, it's like, there's grass-fed beef, but it's coming from New Zealand, right? And like, is it really grass-fed, or, is it really this? Is it really that? And look, the fact that we're even talking about these things, I think that's huge. That is definitely an attestation to the fact that the early stages of the movement, whatever it is, caused some sort of change, that corporations took notice and realized that they had to make some change in what they were doing. Now, does it all swing back to the other side, right? Does that pendulum just go all the way back over? No, it's going to take some time, right? And that means everybody has to stay vigilant and keep pushing and keep working. But we're having those conversations, and I think that's all a really positive thing. And we're having them, thankfully, across multiple communities, not just a select few that can afford a product, right? Which, always is sitting there right behind you. At least to me, it's always there. It's always in the corner of my eye, this idea that this whole thing is for a select group of people, and how can that be? And what do we do to combat that? Mm-hmm. And thankfully, we're having those conversations too, in a much broader dynamic, not just about meat. But I'm glad we're having those conversations about meat, because it's an excellent source of nutrients
right,
that cannot go away.
Mm-hmm.